Thank you for joining our webinar today. We're excited to have all of you, and we're excited about this webinar. These events are a long time coming for us. It takes months of preparation and prayer to decide on topics and prepare content and to line up panelists. And so thank you for making time to join us on a challenging but beautiful and worthwhile topic. Today's webinar is titled Uniting Money and Marriage. And I'm excited to introduce our panelists in just a minute, but wanted to talk about the format really quick. We're going to cover 5 different segments relating to this topic of money and marriage. And we're going to do an interview style. I'll be your host. Again, my name is Matt Myrick, in case you couldn't read my name at the bottom of my screen. And really quick on our panelists, we have 2 different people from 2 different fields. Interestingly, they overlap. We have Derrick Houle, who is a counselor and also a college professor. He's been doing this for a long time, and we're honored and blessed to have him. We also have Joseph Nelson, who has been a financial advisor for over 20 years, walking alongside families, but more importantly, he's been married for 35. And so both of them are extremely equipped to share and walk us through this discussion. I did have a statistic I wanted to share really quick here before we get rolling. So I'm going to do a share screen. Okay. So here's a little bit of research that I thought was insightful from Ramsey Solutions back in 2017. They conducted a survey and determined that couples in healthy marriages are twice as likely to discuss money dreams together. So in other words, of those who are considering their marriages to be great, to be going really well, there's 94% of those are saying they're able to discuss money dreams together. But then the question becomes, is it correlation or causation, right? Is it that those who are in a great marriage are comfortable sharing money dreams together, or is it that because they're sharing money dreams together, they're more likely to consider the marriage great? And now that I've confused everybody, it's time to bring in our experts. Let me stop this screen share, and we'll get started on segment 1. Derrick, under the category of biblical and emotional foundation, what about unity is so challenging for a married couple, even without the topic of finance?
I would say a couple things. One is our priorities are different, usually. So when we enter into a marriage, we have our own background as far as what and how we were brought up, to what our own personal desires, preferences, priorities are. And it can go down to the minute things, such as do you squeeze the toothpaste from the bottom of the tube or the middle, to obviously the larger things that we're talking about today when it comes to money. And then to on top of that, our hearts can be bent. Well, I was going to say selfishness, and it is, but it's also that selfishness is born out of, I would say, our desire to live. So we're soteriological people, meaning that we're always seeking for salvation, we're seeking for life. And that is why when Christ says there's no greater love than when one lays down his life for his friends, that's a very difficult thing to do. So, yeah.
Joe, why is money such a touchy subject for the unity of married couples?
I think money is a good ruler, and it shows us where our priorities are. And when those priorities clash, money can become a point of confrontation. But it encompasses our focus of our resources, and it's our scorecard. So again, we can keep coming back to money as a parameter of how we're doing.
Money is a barometer of how we're doing. Derrick, how does building a foundation of trust and emotional connection contribute to a strong sense of unity in marriage? And what are some practical tips to start that foundation?
Well, I mean, but when we trust somebody, right, it's going to lead to that unity, even though we might have disagreements or we may not have the same interests per se. But when we end up trusting somebody, then we know that they are for us. Um, and so I would say when it comes to taking steps, um, I choose to believe that my wife is for me, not against me. I choose to believe that she's got her best interests. Now, there might be data that shows up of where that conflicts with that or says something different. But when I hold on to that difference rather than working that out, um, then that's when that unity will start to break down because I no longer trust that she's for me. But when I choose to believe that she is, or when she chooses to believe that I'm for her, then we can learn to hear even complaints. We can start to hear those in a way as far as being a need. And so, two things that I would say that help to build that unity is one is choosing to believe that your spouse is for you and not against you, and secondly, learning to listen as complaints, not as an attack or something as far as my shortcoming, but when my wife complains about something, learning to hear the need in that. Okay, what is her need and how can I meet that need? Because if I just pay attention to the complaint, then I end up making it about me and how I fell short or how I'm not measuring up, to which usually I'll say, I don't think I'm much different than anyone else. I get defensive. So don't tell me I don't measure up, right? So
Good. So choose choose to believe the intentions of your spouse and listen for the need in the complaint instead of
yes,
becoming defensive.
yeah.
Wow. That's powerful. Joe, can you help us understand how seeing our money as God's money will help us see our finances differently?
There's a verse in Psalms 24:1. It says, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. And if we can really identify with that it is God's, and he's letting us have that money as a resource, as a steward of his money, it can change our perspective. And I think one of my mentors, Ron Blue, said the longer term your perspective, the better your decisions. So that's why our company logo is the dot and the arrow. So the dot is our lifetime and the arrow is eternity. And if we have that perspective, it'll be easier for us to give to God first. And I've seen over and over when couples make a giving plan and they give God the first fruits of their income, things always tend to go better with them. Their attitudes are better, their expectancy and joy of money is better. So having that belief that one, that God owns it all, and two, having a giving plan that honors God with our first fruits, I think those are cornerstones in having a healthy money relationship in marriage.
Excellent. Let's move on to communication strategies. So, Derrick, how can effective communication foster unity within a marriage?
I don't know if I would answer. I'm not going to answer the question with a how, because I'm not so sure there's steps to that. But I would just say when we do have good communication, it can't help but produce unity. So again, I would say when we're forthcoming and transparent, which to me are the key ingredients when it comes to good communication, and when we end up believing that our spouse is for us, not against us, it makes it easier. Not saying that it's easy, but it makes it easier for us to be transparent, forthcoming. That it can't help but bring unity because then my wife gets to know me or I get to know her. I think it was earlier as far as speaking, someone said about coming to a place of understanding. I don't think we need to understand in order to have good communication. And I say this as a jest, but I say it because I actually believe it. I don't understand that woman that I've known for, well, we've been married for 37 years. I know her, but I don't understand her most of the time. I honestly don't get her. But I do know her. And that, to me, that's a difference. And I liken that to even our relationship with God. God has never invited us to understand him. You search all of Scripture, God never invites us to understand him, but he does invite us to know him. And I even think when it comes to our marriage relationship, the invitation needs to be about knowing. And so when we know somebody, then that tells me there's good communication. And when there's good communication, that's just going to lead to unity. So, but let me clarify. Don't equate unity with agreeing. So, unity does not equal agreeing. So,
Derrick, that was powerful. What I heard you say was that with good, transparent communication, it's going to foster unity organically. It's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
That also, that to understand the other person is not, perhaps not achievable, but that's not necessary to have good communication or unity, because you don't have to agree about everything.
Right.
But it's important to know them and to know that they mean well for you and for themselves.
Yes. Yep.
Excellent. Good. Derrick, another question for you.
Yeah.
What is empathetic listening? How does that fit into a budgeting meeting?
Well, I would just say empathetic listening is when we actually are listening rather than waiting for our turn to talk. But empathetic listening to me is trying to put yourself in their pain. That's where we get the word empathy from. M, to enter. Pathy means pain, so it's actually entering into someone's pain. But empathetic listening is, to me, actually listening and trying to feel what they're feeling, entering into that. And then the second part of your question was, what about budget?
Yeah, how does entering into their pain, empathetic listening, fit into the budgeting meeting, which nobody likes?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll put it this way, and maybe Joe might disagree with me. I'll give you an example of when we were first married. So my wife was stay-at-home mom, but she would do daycare part-time to make it so that we could live. And but I would go off, had a job that I went to, and would come home. And if you were to ask me, is your money or is it ours? I would have told you, no, it's our money. But the reality is I still viewed it as it being mine, because if I was to come home and my wife would be so excited to show me this throw pillow that she bought or some sort of thing for the house, my first question would always be, well, how much did that cost? Which would just deflate the joy she wanted to share, right? Because in my mind, do we need another throw pillow? I would be fine with posters on the wall. And so, or a crate for an end table. But for her, part of her giftedness, part of her worship, I would even say, is about creating beauty even within the home. But because I would make it or ask that question, then pretty soon we'd find ourselves off arguing about money. And obviously I would become indignant and justified in what I was saying to her, to which she would is also right, to which basically just shows different priorities. Because then she'd throw in my face as far as, oh, why are you spending money on a coffee when you could bring coffee from home? Or do you actually need another CD? As far as, because for me, music still is important. Or even to this day, do you actually need that power tool, even though you're only going to use it once? And yes, I do. But we found ourselves probably in about our 4th year of marriage, when we came to setting the budget, was our fighting really had to do with our priorities and not being unified in that way, right? Which is okay, that her priorities are different than mine. Now, we did have the same priorities as far as, no, the house needs to be paid, heat bill needs to be paid, all those things we're on the same page with. But when it came to things that were important to me or important to her, we're vastly different. And so part of that budgeting was about, let's give each other allowance. And therefore, if I want to get a new tool, I use my allowance. I might have to save up for it. And so I would say that's where the unity can help with the budget, if I answered your question.
Yeah, Derrick, that was great. That was a great summary of how, when it comes to having the budgeting meeting, that when it comes to the non-essentials, it's extremely normal for spouses to value different things.
Right. Yep.
And depending on how we talk about that will lead to whether this fosters greater trust and unity, or it's a source of conflict, because, right, both parties feel extremely justified by what they value.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
Joe, did you have anything to add on to that before we moved on to transparency and trust?
I really love the story. Thank you, Derrick, for that. I think about budgeting as planning to spend and planning to save. And I think about spending in the spirit. I mean, I remember going out to eat when we were first married, and I'd sit down and I'd eat with a frown because I was thinking about how much it was costing. Instead of saying, we've set this money aside for this meal, we're going to enjoy the meal together. So I, didn't enjoy as much life as I could have, because I wasn't, I say, spending in the spirit, or having a plan and then living out that plan in freedom. So I think that's really important to communicate. And I like Derrick's example of having his and her allowance, and then you can spend that how you want, because we're individuals, we have different dreams, then we can support each other in that.
Moving on to transparency and trust, Derrick, how does each spouse's past and formative years play a role in how they view finances?
Oh, I would say it's everything, as far as of how they view finances, because our past experiences, our upbringing, it becomes our template. Whether it's something we rebel against because it was a bad experience, and so we do the opposite, or it's just ingrained in us because that's what was modeled for us. And so it definitely shapes how we end up thinking about finances, to how we behave about finances. And if it's, I don't know if I want to use the words bad or good, maybe healthy, unhealthy might be better. For that to change, there needs to be a paradigm shift in our thinking, which can take a little while. But to answer your question simply, is that it's everything to me. So
So perhaps understanding more about your spouse's past could be helpful to know them.
Oh, yes. Yeah, most definitely. Yeah.
Joe, what's a good process to discuss and set financial goals such that both spouses know where the other one's coming from?
I really think it's important in the budgeting process to share the values for each thing. I mean, like, there's your fixed expenses, your mortgage, insurance, those things. But then when you come to your discretionary spending, how valuable is that? And one little trick is like to put a number 1 to 10. So having our dining versus our entertainment, and so how each spouse can put a number on it, and then you can kind of help that discussion to see where they want to be. And then it's a negotiation, but making it really clear how important that is to you can be a step forward in that decision process.
Derrick, what are some signs that show that transparency isn't happening in marriage?
Oh, I think I could put that on a spectrum of where you can be at one end of where you have one spouse that is hiding what they're buying or spending, or not being forthcoming as far as just of how much money they actually do have or how much debt they're actually in, to the other end of where we just don't talk about it, of where we're just silent about money, or because it's maybe been such a, I don't want to use the word traumatic, but an unpleasant experience when it comes to talking about money, that I would say there's no transparency when we don't talk about it. Well, we'll just bury her, or he does all the money stuff, I don't do anything with that, or she does it all, I don't do anything with it. That's not being transparent with them. And I would say that that's actually very unhealthy. Even though I would say, like in our family, I'm the bill payer, but my wife needs to know where the money is going, what the bills are. Not about overlooking my shoulder, that's not the point, but it's about what if something was to happen to me, so that she's not left in the dark, right? So to me, that's not being transparent. So
Derrick, what I heard you say is that it's a spectrum, to answer the question about signs that transparency isn't occurring. One hand, that could be not able to talk about the topic. It's just we're going to avoid it because it's too challenging. And then the other side might be to deliberately hide the purchases that we're not forthcoming. Okay.
Or even, I'll just add again, even just not being honest as far as even entering into marriage with the debt that one has. I've counseled couples of where they weren't forthcoming about that. They're 2 years into their marriage, and it's like, well, I didn't know he had all these student loans. I didn't know he had thousands of dollars in credit card debt. It's like, where was that before that conversation, before you got married? So to me, those are signs. That's not going to change unless that gets talked about.
Derrick, a segue from what you just shared, how can financial transparency and trust contribute to a deeper emotional connection between spouses?
Well, when we're transparent about it, then, and especially again, and I agree with Joe, is that he said earlier, money will always show what our priorities are, because we'll always have enough money for the things that are important to us. And so to be transparent about that's a way of getting to know somebody. And so even when my wife knows what I like to spend money on, or what I find to be important, and that can even be something that's enjoyable, that's a way of her getting to know me, and vice versa. And so that's where, again, that transparency cannot help but produce that unity.
Let's move on to navigating challenges to strengthen unity. Derrick, what are what are the steps to be taken after trust has been broken with money management in marriage? I mean, you talked about signs that transparency isn't occurring. Okay, so maybe that has happened. Now what? What are the next steps?
Well, maybe I'll answer that by saying I'll give my view about trust, to which you guys are welcome to disagree. But I'm not a believer that trust can be earned. And the reason why I don't believe trust can be earned is because I'll use an example of when our kids were still at home, which hasn't been for many, many years now. So I remember back when our oldest, Elliot, I don't know, he was maybe in 11th grade at the time. Well, he was driving, and it was either Friday or Saturday. Need you to be home by midnight or whatever it was. I can't remember. And he didn't end up coming home, right? So I can say that he broke our trust. So we have the conversation. If I was to make it about him earning that trust back, who ends up holding all the power? I do, right? And constantly he's going to be asking, well, where's the bar? How many hoops do I have to jump through? And then it's also going to depend on the mood I'm in. Because maybe I'm in a crabby mood, and you know what? Or I see one little thing. Oh, yeah, no. So I'm not a believer that we can earn trust. Now, I believe we can develop a character that is trustworthy. But it still doesn't guarantee trust. To me, trust is a gift. Trust is something that I choose to give. And so my son broke my trust. Am I legitimate to not trust him again? Yep. But if I want the relationship to work, I'm going to have to choose to trust him. So, long answer to your question, when it comes to that financial thing being broken, that forgiveness means that you're going to also have to trust the person. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't steps as far as about, okay, can I see what you are doing or making, or what steps are you doing in order to give me some sort of security that I believe you're making the right decisions or choices? Let me be involved. And so again, that to me, that goes back to that transparency of that, yes, you can see me make my choices, or I'll come to you and ask you, what do you think, or what have you.
Good. So Derrick, I'll do my best to summarize. So,
Sure.
Your approach to beginning to rebuild trust is to recognize that trust isn't something that can be earned, because ultimately it's a decision that the party who had perhaps been wronged makes the decision to trust them. But that's not to say that there shouldn't be prudence and steps to that process.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it definitely makes it easier for me to give that trust, right? When I end up seeing that that person can be trustworthy. So, but I mean, Joe can be as trustworthy as he wants, and I still get to choose whether I'm going to trust him or not. So, but it makes it easier for me to give that, most definitely.
Joe, what financial strategies can couples use to minimize the impact of external stressors on their relationship?
I'll be concise. Number one, have an emergency fund, 3 to 6 months of expenses on hand. Number two, limit debt or eliminate debt. So if you have a reserve, you have no debt, you're going to be able to handle what life throws at you much better than if you're overextended and presume on the future.
So this next question is for both Joe and Derrick. Are there biblical principles that offer guidance on how couples can renew their connection and commitment through their marriage journey?
I can start. I think of Ephesians 5, where it says, Christ loved the church and laid down his life for her. And that's how husbands to love his wife. And what an example as Christ laid down his life. And then in 5:28, it says, husbands are to love their wives as they love their own bodies. So, I mean, just this whole like concept of submitting in love to our spouses. If we have that as a foundation, we're going to be giving and generous, and the money will flow much more easier if that's our attitude to do the best for our spouse.
Amen. Yeah, I mean, I guess I would concur with that and add as far as husbands, for us to be the ones to initiate, and there to be an invitation on both parts, as far as sharing our lives together. So if marriage is to be this journey, then let's be purposeful, and let's invite each other into our lives. And money to me is always just going to be the symptom of something either good or something bad. And so that stat that you showed at the beginning, Matt, I definitely wouldn't say that's a causation, but there's definitely a positive correlation, right? Mm-hmm. That good marriages can talk about, dream about money. And so to me, money is just a symptom of whether it's healthy or unhealthy.
Our last category is on growth, renewal, and resources. Joe, as couples evolve and their financial situations change, for example, getting to retirement or receiving an inheritance, how can they adjust their financial plans while kind of maintaining that unity?
I think it's really critical to stick with the basics of communicating well, having a plan, and talking about your money. I think early on, I've seen over and over when young couples get a small raise, it can be a train wreck because they can spend that raise many times if they're not careful. So, or sometimes later getting a windfall, having a big chunk of money, and then that can derail them again. Whereas oftentimes if there's a medical hardship or some difficulty, people can bear down together and get through that. But it seems to me that the blessings can be even more challenging than the hardships as we face changes. So really to be intentional about communicating, have a plan, have a continual check-in, either it's monthly or quarterly, review things and stay on the same page. Those are some tips that can help.
Mm-hmm. Joe, that was really profound, that sometimes blessings can be more challenging than hardships to unity in marriage. It's really interesting. Derrick, could you provide an example of an exercise that couples can use to enhance their knowledge of each other?
Yeah. Come up with questions. Even by last Christmas, as an example, there was I don't know if I found it at Mackenzie Place but it was just a box. It was called Foodie, and obviously it's trivial questions about food. My wife she's a foodie. She's a very good cook, and she loves cooking shows, and so it was just something to get sitting around the table to where we just play the trivia, to have a list of questions that are kind of common about past, present, future. So to me, that's just one easy step to get to know each other. Because just when you think you know your spouse, things change, right? Especially women. Sorry. So that, to me, it doesn't need to be complicated. Spend time together. I know since we've been empty nesters, because my wife and I our interests are quite a bit different. But we like, or I will say she likes word games. So there's a couple of word games she gets on her phone that we end up playing together. It's not that it's my favorite thing, but I know she likes it, and she's invited me to play with her on that. So I do it. So one of the things we actually try to do almost every night at 6:30 is we watch Wheel of Fortune. Now, is it really about watching Wheel of Fortune? No, it's about sitting together, because you never know what gets talked about or what word or puzzle you solve leads to a conversation about something. And so it's just about being purposeful, I would say, and find those things of where you get to ask of each other. Something we'll do every once in a while. When I say once in a while, maybe 3 times a year or something, is, hey, where would you like to go if money was no option? What trip would you like to take? Just things of that nature, just to get to know one another. So I don't know if I answered your question or not.
You most certainly did. Derrick, as we wrap up, was there anything that you wanted to share, anything that you thought would be pertinent and relevant to add to this conversation that maybe wasn't asked?
No, I guess I would just say, since this is about marriage, money, and unity, is what I've heard, kind of the main thing is, if you're not having unity about your money, then know that other things in your marriage, there isn't unified. And so pay attention to that. And not that money needs to be the focal point. Let it be, as Joe maybe said, the barometer, or let it speak to something of what else is going on. Because if we just pay attention to that symptom, then someone will just take over, or it gets brushed underneath the carpet, or what have you. We can find different ways to not argue about money that doesn't address what the real issue is going on. So let it speak, and not to be threatened by it, but let it speak of, okay, maybe we need to look at as far as our relationship.
Very good. At this time, I'd like to invite Q&A. I'm going to show you where to go. Those who are still participating here, it's the bottom of your screen. You click on the Q&A, and you can type your questions into the box. You've got fair game to grill Derrick or Joseph. So, okay, here's one. This question is for Derrick. Derrick, how do couples know when counseling would be the next best step, when seeing a counselor would be appropriate?
Oh, good question. I don't think it's ever a bad idea to go to counseling, even if it's just for a tune-up. But I would say, it kind of saddens me that we're at a place of where we've kind of left it up to, quote unquote, the experts. I don't know if I can give you an answer as far as going, oh yeah, you should go to counseling. To me, find that support group, other couples, to be able to share what's going on in your life, because I'm going to guess that 95% of the couples that you're involved with, they've either have had those struggles, or they're going through the same thing, especially if you're in the same age. And we just don't do a good job in the church. And that's just my own experience. I can't speak for yours, but I don't believe we've done a good job as far as being transparent in the church. When we go to church, we put on the smile and make it look like things are going well. And And so it can be hard to find that support group or group that I think can do better than counseling, to tell you the truth. But yeah, no, I guess I would just say if you're feeling kind of stuck, feeling like you're spinning your wheels in the way of your relationship, then go. So things don't have to be at a catastrophic state to go to counseling. In fact, as a counselor, I'll speak for others. Please don't wait till then, because you can't perform miracles. So, yeah.
Derrick, I liked how you started that. You said that it's okay to go in for a tune-up. Kind of think of making sure things are on track before they're off the rails. That's good.
Yeah.
This question is for Joe. Have you seen examples of couples that really have this down? And I think what they're getting at is, what are some examples of people who are just doing a great job of fostering unity, having great communication, and some key overlap you see between some of those families?
Yeah. I think having a healthy view of money is a tool, a test, and a testimony. It's going to show up, and I think it's demonstrated by a zest for life. And I think if people can really get into enjoying and reveling in what they already have, rather than longing for what they don't have, that can be another example of families that have it together and can enjoy life. Man, I remember this one couple that they were multimillionaires, and they would go out and share a meal, and they would see how low they could get the ticket. They would split an entree and have water, and they would just laugh the whole time about how little their ticket was going to be. They could have bought the restaurant, but they just loved going out and enjoying each other, and the jokes they would tell, and they really enjoyed saving. Maybe they were a little too frugal, but they made a game out of it, and making the game out of it brought them joy too. So I just think there's having zest in life can be a great way to show that you're winning with money.
That's very insightful. Good. Okay, well, that does wrap up our questions. Want to thank everyone for joining us today, and also want to let you know that we will be sending out an email to everybody who registered for this with a list of resources that our team and Joseph and Derrick have recommended, and so do stay tuned for that. And as always, we want to be a resource for you, your friends, your family. Please don't hesitate to give us a call if you have any questions or concerns. We want to hear from you. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you.